Hi, welcome to Biology IB Diploma Biology by Teacher Patrick Chimuli. And here to discuss today our first topic, which is dealing with Unit Chapter 1, Unit 1.1. Half of it I'll be doing 2 units, 1 unit. I break it into two halves. So today I want us to discuss more about this topic 1.1, where we talk about the cell, which is cytology. It is suitable for IB students, IAS students, and all other students who are doing national CBC, who are doing Uganda national examinations. Everyone can do this. So we are discussing the cell theory, which is discussing the origin of cells, the cell theory, then the dismays of the cell theory, the facts behind it, and what is not working with it. So basically, it's IB diploma for both SL and HL can use the same information. So basically, everyone knows what we call a cell, and every individual can discuss and say that a cell is the basic unit of life. Others say it's the basic unit. Others say it's they call it the starting point of life. But what we need to understand today is that what is the cell theory, a cell specialization, what is the cell theory, cell specialization, and cell replacement as the first unit that I'm going to touch, and I'll touch the other units later. So everyone knows what cells are. What are cells? And everyone, if we are to answer the question, what are cells? Basic unit of life. What is life? We all know that life is normal functioning of all body systems. This marks what life is. Normal functioning of all body systems. And if you remember in your previous classes, you used to discuss, to talk about life, how we have cell specialization from the cell, then we go to the tissues, we go to the organs, we go to the systems, and then we go to the organ system. So what are cells? So the simple answer with that will be cells are us. We are the cells. I am the cell and you are the cell. And as you may have heard with your teachers, cells are us. So we are part of them. So a person contains about 100 trillion cells, as you can see, 100 trillion cells. That's an average person. And one average, I mean, 100 trillion cells. Did you know? 100 trillion cells. And every cell has the capacity to maintain life, to make life, and then make you grow. So we grow slow by slow just because of cells, division, and all that stuff. So what exactly is that? So there are about 200 different types of cells in mammals. That is one of us. So there are about 200 different cell types, so different types of cells in mammals. We have very many cells. We have blood cells, we have muscle cells, we have skeletal cells, we have reproductive cells, we have skeletal cells. Skeletal cells. We have a lot of cells. So if on average, if you want to understand, we have over 200 different cells that make up who we are in this business. Then, if you can see, cells are very tiny, first of all. They measure on average of about 0.002 centimeters, which is like a 20 micrometers across. So that's about 120 to 1,250 cells shoulder to shoulder per inch. So that means that they are very minute, they are very tiny, and it's hard for us to like distinguish that this is the cell, this is the other cell. And this way we see how we can see. So you can see this is the whole cell starting from going up. This is a dividing cell, first of all. You see it trying to divide here in the middle. So the whole of this cell from one level to another, from here to here, it goes for 10 micrometers. That is from the molecular biology of the cell, the 5th edition. You can find that same picture. So the key to every biological problem must finally be sought in the cell for every living organisms, or at some time has been a cell. So anything starts from within a cell, and that's why we say that biological problem must finally be solved in a cell. So everything starts from the cell, and this was a statement by which was saying by Wilson, AB in 1925. So what are we going to see according to the cell theory? What does the cell theory say? What is it all about? So the cell theory, this was a prostration that was proposed independently in 1838 and between 1838 and 1839. Yeah. So it's a cornerstone for biology. So we all know that, if it wasn't this, we wouldn't maybe have understood, we wouldn't have known what exactly is behind there to drive what we call the cell. So what does it say? The cell theory asserts that all organisms are composed of one or more cells. One or more cells. All organisms are composed of one or more cells. Then the other one is all organisms are composed of either one cell or more cells. What does that mean? It means that we are either unicellular or multicellular. For any living organism to appear, it must either be unicellular or multicellular. And then the other one is like that cells are the basic, or they are the starting point, actually. They are life. They are the starting point of life, as you can see, a starting point of life. So, what are evidences? So, many scientists, through research, formed the theory of microscope. Evidence is a key. So, for us to come up with this, we had different scientists go and hit into their laboratories, and came up with microscopes that could aid us to see all this. So what else is another theory? So these three theories make what we call the cell theory, that all cells arise from previously existing cells. So cell gives rise to cells. That's it. Cells give rise to cells. But is this true? Does it? In science, it's always about exchanging ideas and like trying to debate over it. So is this really true? We want to check it out and see. How did we come to know this? That evidences, many scientists through research formed the theory. Microscope evidence is a key to support the cell theory. When cells are removed from a tissue, they can survive for periods of time, meaning that cells can live independently by themselves, provided the conditions are good. We see bacterial cells, we see the virus cells, we see different cells. So if they get a tissue and remove some cells kept for some time, it is possible that we can find cells. So these ones are all supporting the cell theory that yes, cells, all organisms are composed of cells, and cells are the basic or the starting points of life, and also cells are raised from previously existing cells. This is true, and it works for everyone. So if you want to find out more about the cell theory, you can continue to Google and also visit more classes. Then we can proceed when we say when cells are removed, they can stay. No unit is smaller than a cell could survive on its own. So anything that is smaller than a cell cannot survive on its own. So this one takes us to what we see. We have the different types of cells. I have the nerve cell. So cells are modified differently to serve different functions. So you can see I have the nerve cell. It's in this form. It has the dendrons, it has dendrites, and it has the dendrites which are receiving the stimuli from different parts. We have the muscle cells, which you have striations like this. As you proceed with these chapters, we shall discuss more about this. We have the smooth, voluntarily and striated muscles. We also have the bone cells, the osteoblasts. They're also appearing in this form, as you can see in a concentric ring. We have the ovum or reproductive cells, where I have the sperm and the ovum. I also have the blood cells, where I have the red blood cells, the lymphocytes. I have the melanocytes for allergies or The basophils, we have the eosinophils and neutrophils. Oh, these are blood cells. They are different. I also have what we call the gland cells, which are specialized for producing secretions and fluids like saliva, like vaginal fluids, like water, like different things. So cells come in a variety of types, as you've seen. So there are very many. However, we have the two types of cells depending on the cells. We have the so-called the eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells, where we have the prokaryotic cells discussed as cells which lack the membrane organelle. I mean the membrane organelles. Yes. So prokaryotic cells like a bacteria, these ones are believed to be the primitive cells from the time of evolution. They were the precursors of life. So we believe that they have, first of all, they lack a lot of things. One of them is they lack the double membrane organelles like the mitochondria, like the rough endoplasmic reticulum. If you look at the organization of microtubules in the prokaryotes, the organization is a 9+0, whereas in eukaryotic cells, it's a 9+2 arrangement. You find that the ribosomes in prokaryotic cells, it's 70S, and for eukaryotes, it's 80S. So this marks a difference between them. That makes a difference. So when we come to evidences to support the cell theory, is it true that cells arise from pre-existing cells? Is it true that every living organism is made up of cells? We want to see, are there evidences to support this? Yes. So we have seen that through the processes of scientific investigations, much of the cells have been collected to support the cell theory. Living things have been examined and everything have been found to consist cells. So that means the first evidence that there is nothing that has life which you ever check out and doesn't have cells. So that's one support. So all research shows that every living organism has its origin. Or when you check, it contains cells. It contains cells. So that makes it a right guess. Then we also talk about some science. There are some exceptions that rule, and while they do not disprove the cell, but they have some things they can do. The discrepancies which do not fit the idea of cells as small box-like structures within same organelles inside each cell. So when we come to a question, we start questioning the cell theory using typical examples. In science, we always use examples. So what did we use to carry out some questions on cell theory? We used some striated muscles, giant algae, and accepted fungal hyphae. So the following examples do not disprove. They don't disapprove, but at least there is something they are trying to remove out of the cell theory. So that means that the cell theory still has 90%, that it's true, and then the 10% comes as a result of some of these discrepancies, as we are yet to see next. So striated muscles like skeletal muscle fibers are larger, can be bigger than 300 millimeters longer as compared to the cell which we looked at before, which was like 10 micrometers. So because yes, striated muscles, they are muscles which we call muscle cells, but they are larger than the previous cell size as seen. So this one brings a discrepancy. Number two, they also have one plasma membrane but many nuclei. Some of them are multinucleated but with one plasma membrane. So that's another discrepancy. There we were looking at one cell, one cytoplasm. So this tries to come out and tries to disapprove the cell theory. However, it doesn't take it away. It just removes some discrepancies. So it is non-typical. It's not the typical view of one nuclear per cell. So that's the difference. Those are the two. The striated muscles, they bring out some discrepancies that they are bigger than the usual normal cell, and yet they are cells. Number two, they have one plasma membrane but many nuclei. That means they are multinucleated. But then, so this one still can work and help us to do something bigger than this. It all happens. So another one which we use here is algae. So the algae, as we can see, algae, we have these plants which are primitive plants, so if we may call them. And algae, we know that they grow in some areas, they grow in dirty places, and sometimes they are looked at as pioneer plants and all that stuff. So algae is a single-celled organism that challenges the idea that cells must be small in size. If you look at the size of all these algae, it's big. So this one moves with a mass of cell which is striated. So algae are bigger, and it's one cell, but it's big. So does that mean that cells are not supposed to be small? Yeah, there are differences. Sometimes variations occur. So this is another variation we need to accept that is trying to challenge but doesn't disapprove the cell. It's still a cell, but bigger. It also has complex structures made up of 3 anatomical parts. It also has some structures that are outgrowths, like the stalk apex, like the stalk, wall scar, and no different other, the wall of hairs. So these ones are like outgrowths of one cell, so which is not explained in a cell theory. So this one brings the discrepancies. Then when we come to accepted fungal hyphae, the challenge is the idea that a cell is single unit, it's not a single unit. So this one you can see this is one septum, another septum, another septum, another septum, but it's one cell, different segments. That one brings some discrepancies. It's like someone wanted to find out reasons to argue of our cell theory, but again, it doesn't hold a lot of water. Then continuous cytoplasm cell walls made of chitin, that's okay. Then we can go to, you can also take some time to research about the contribution of Robert Hooke, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, Matthias Kelvin, Theodore Swan, and then Louis Pasteur. These ones did a lot of work in cell theory. So evidences to support the cell theory, despite these exceptions, most living cell tissues are composed of cells. So cells can be removed from one organism and survive. Whereas that means that cells can live independently. They can survive on themselves. So this same work you find at university, you find at first year, first semester, cell theory, and also you find the same work everywhere. So cells can be removed from an organism and survive, whereas smaller parts cannot do so. So this is evidence that supports the cell theory that cells are the smallest unit of life. So that means cells are life. Then the evidence too is that the statement of Theo has shown up in biology experiments that disapprove the idea of spontaneous generation. The only exception of this would be when life first appeared on Earth's surface. So the evidence for support of the last statement of the cell theory has shown up in biology experiments that disapproves the idea of spontaneous generation. And the only exception of this would be when life first appeared on Earth's surface. So organisms consisting of only one cell carry out all functions. So this one is another explanation which I think everyone must understand. That yes, one cell can be in position to carry out all the physiological and the physiological activities as required. For example, all unicellular organisms consist of only one cell, and that one cell must carry out all life functions for that organism to survive. For example, the nutrition, metabolism, growth, response, excretion, homeostasis, and reproduction, that is Mrs. Green, everything can be done in one cell. So for the unicellular organisms, so this proves that cell is the basic unit of life. It's capable of living on its own. So if one cell can do this, for example, look at one. A metabolism, we have all the chemical reactions, which include respiration, growth. A growth or change in size may be limited but evident. So all chemical reactions in one single organism, in one single celled organisms, can take place. There is growth, but growth is not so much like exaggerated. Growth is limited, but there is some change in size. There is what we call reproduction because they contain the hereditary information or molecules that can be passed on either sexually or asexually. Then the other one is nutrition. Nutrition, we know that nutrition, that is acquisition of nourishment. This one cell can carry out this. It's either absorption of materials or photosynthesis. So they can also carry out homeostasis, which is internal environment or the temperature, pH, water balance can all be taking place in one cell. Response to the stimuli, that is irritability, one cell. One cell carries out nutrition, carries out metabolism, carries out growth, carries out responses, homeostasis, reproduction, as well as excretion, removal of metabolic wastes from the body. One cell. So a cell is the basic unit of life. Then when you go, you can check a very good example. Organisms consisting of only one cell and carry out all functions of life in that cell include what we call remembering the functions of life. An easy way to remember. This is Mrs. Green. That's our memory aid that we use here. So if you look at a paramecium, this is a seriated protozoa. In kingdom Protoctista, phylum Protozoa, and then it has a seriated protozoa. It has cilia. It's one cell, but this is the whole of a paramecium. It's always found in dirty water, and it's responsible for most of the diarrhea and all that stuff. So you can culture it and check. It has all these organelles inside it. So it carries out excretion. How does it carry out excretion? Carries out excretion. The plasma membrane controls the entry and exit of substances, expulsion of metabolic wastes. This one is by forming a vacuum. The vacuum is formed and then pours stuff out, and then it can remain. How about what we call homeostasis? So homeostasis is the process by which the internal fluid tissues are kept constant or keeping the internal environment constant. So this one still, I'm saying it uses the contractile vacuum which fills up with water and expels through the plasma membrane to manage the waste content inside. Then we also come to response, the wave action of a cilia. The responses, if you look at it very well, it contains the cilia, which cilia can keep beating, and then this helps it to move. Yeah, what else do we see? We look at the reproduction. Yeah, this one, because it's a single cell, it's hard for it to find mates in one way or the other. So the nucleus can divide to support cell division. That's by mitosis. Reproduction is often asexual. So it reproduces by asexual. That asexual reproduction type is what we call binary fission, where we get one cell dividing to give rise to two cells. And then growth, it's consuming assimilation, biomass, food, and the paramecium will get larger. So with the growth, there is no multiplication of cells. Instead, it just adds on increase in bulk through eating. Then how about feeding and nutrition, acquisition of nourishment, the food vacuum contained in organisms, paramecium has consumed. So this is how it works here. It's through the food vacuum. It forms a vacuum, finds a microscopic food, forms a vacuum, and this vacuum is taken in. Metabolism. Metabolism, most metabolic pathways happen in the cytoplasm. So this is the cell theory. And then when we were carrying out some investigations, we saw that one of these, we can see the Vibrio cholerae. How does the algae show the functions of life? This one is showing how this cell is dividing to give rise to more other cells. So this picture is showing a type of asexual reproduction whereby a cell is dividing into two to form that. So this one also has the same. It has the excretion, reproduction. Through formation of reproduction, the nucleus can divide to support cell division. That is mitosis. One cell, that's binary fission, and then response the wave like cilia, also the same way as we see. This is a bacteria, Vibrio cholerae, and then this is how it carries out. So you can carry out more reading about this, and then you get it more. So cell size. Once cells reach a certain size, they stop growing and dividing. So when they stop growing, if a cell grew too large, if cells grow too large, they would have many problems because its surface area to volume ratio would become too small. And when it becomes too small, that means that the movement of materials in and out of cells now will require a very big, to require sophisticated structures to do that. So cells reach a certain size and they can no longer add on their growth. Instead, they have to maintain the ability of large surface area to volume ratio so that materials can move in and out of the cell. Then, as the size of an object increases, the ratio between surface area and volume decreases and makes it difficult for it to enter. So the relative sizes of different molecules, cell membranes, thickness, viruses, bacteria, and everything, they are all here. Starting from the prokaryotic cells are the smallest cells. They are from 1 to 5 micrometers. Then the eukaryotes, they become from 10 to 10. So prokaryotic comes from the word primitive cells, which were the pioneer cells from which the eukaryotic, which are the cells with membrane organelles came up. For example, where we are, and then the cells that we possess. So different cells have different things, as you can see. You can take some time and read through. And all these cell size, relative order, organelles, bacteria, viruses, molecules. So we can see them according to their orders. The small ones, the mitochondrion, it's a cell of its own. The chloroplast is a cell of its own. These are all eukaryotic cells with double membrane organelles. And these ones up here, we also have the human height. Okay. So these are all cell types and all cell structures. And I want to end with discussing the surface area to volume ratio, which is important in limitation of cell size. So when you get a cell and calculate the surface area to volume ratio, you realize that cells have a large surface area. As the smaller the cell, the larger is the surface area to volume ratio. And when the surface area to volume ratio is large, it's easier for materials to move in and out of this cell by simple diffusion. So that means exchange of materials is easy and this cell can survive on its own. The larger the cell, if you calculate its surface area to volume ratio, you will see that it has a small surface area to volume ratio, whereas this one has a large one. So the smaller the surface area to volume ratio, that is the more difficult it is for diffusion of materials to move in and out of this. And this is one reason why we say that smaller organisms use a lot of energy, because they expend a lot of energy, and that means they lose a lot of heat to the surrounding. And this is the reason or the biology behind why they require to take a lot of food, because they have a high metabolic rate. Due to the large surface area to volume ratio, they tend to lose a lot of water. They tend to lose a lot of heat. And for the body to maintain its normal heat, it must have a high metabolic rate to replace the lost heat to the environment. So that's why we say small organisms dissipate a lot of heat and large organisms dissipate less heat. So this one makes a lot of sense. And then from there, we can see connection between surface area of a cell and its ability to exchange materials with its outside environment. Because, we need the external environment and internal environment must always communicate. So in the cells, the rate at which materials can enter or leave depends on the surface area of that cell, while the rate at which those materials can be used or produced depends on the volume of that cell. So if cells become too large, it becomes inefficient at exchanging materials, within the environment. So the smaller the organism, the easier the materials exchange and all that stuff. And then also the cell's nucleus, the brain can only control a certain amount of living active cytoplasm. So how is this picture taken? Okay, fine, fine, fine. So you can see this mouse here has a large surface area to volume ratio, and therefore its feeding abilities are high as compared to a larger organism like an elephant or something, because elephants eat less, and this one, its metabolic rate is high because it loses a lot of heat to the surrounding. So this is thick. That means that the rate at which it loses materials are less as compared to smaller ones in plants. So this is an adaptation to environment. So Shiru, might this be a disadvantage? Warm blooded loses heat constantly. Yeah, it's a disadvantage to eat constantly. This one must eat constantly, as I've been mentioning, because it has a small size, and this means it has a large surface area to volume ratio, and this enables it to do. Cactus, thin needle-like leaves, they decrease the surface area to volume ratio, and therefore it needs to conserve water because it lives in a desert life. That's an adaptation. So organisms, they tend to optimize this by having some structures in them. For example, in our body, we have the so-called the alveoli, which mark up the intestines that enable exchange of materials through absorption and excretion. The same with this. So, yes, we will do this more. We can do this homework. Cellular organisms have properties that emerge from the interaction of cellular components. Yeah. So we have what we call the emergent properties. Which emergent properties? These are properties whereby it's not easy for one cell to carry out its all functions. It requires the combination of cells to do some activities. So emergent components or properties here, we are trying to define the limitations of a cell, which can be overcome by the use of a combined power of different cells to form to carry out this activity well and strong. So that's where we have the emergent properties. In other words, multicellular organisms can achieve more than the sum of what each cell could accomplish individually. So you have more chances of carrying out a lot of metabolic activities as compared to one cell, because one cell, it is like overwhelmed with the way activities are done. But the more the cells here, the more easy it becomes for these multicellular organisms to survive. And this is an advantage of multicellularity over the unicellularity, that here at least different cells come together to form tissues, and these tissues can form organs, and these organs can form systems which can aid in the sequential flow and supply of materials to each and every cell. So multicellular organisms show emergent properties when the cells work together to achieve more than what one cell could on its own. And therefore, a good example of emergent properties in multicellular organisms would be a human brain. Our brain, on their own individual neurons, it has different cells coming together to carry out this. One cell couldn't do. So we have neurons, we have the one of their own individual neurons. They have neurons are not capable of thought, but it is the interaction of all neurons that allow the brain to think and carry out all that. So the emergent properties, when we break something in complex in two component pieces, they each appear to be simple. Combined, they can perform a whole function, and this is where we have the system organization. So this came as an emergent property to outplay the 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 overwhelmingness of what would happen to one cell. So here we have cells organized according to cell levels so as to suit different functions. And this is where you have cells. Cells, they go to tissues, we go to organs, organ systems, and an organism. So this helps the multicellularity This improves the efficiency of how an organism can function. It also increases the ability of survival. It increases that the efficiency is increased, and yet there is no stress on one cell, but cells work together until when we form a whole organism like you and me. So we have different specialized cells. As we can see, we have cells. We have 22 distinct highly specialized cells. And remember, we said cells are modified differently to serve different purposes. For example, we have cells when you look at the cells in your palms, are different from the cells on your face. They are modified differently from the cells on your chest, modified differently from the cells on your thighs, modified differently from the cells in the respiratory system, and also modified differently from the cells in the nervous system. So the different specializations is one adaptation that helps the cells to suit the different functions that they are going to serve. So we have defined differentiation. So differentiation is the process that occurs in the cells of multicellular organisms where cells develop in different ways and become specialized for one particular function. So we have differentiation involves the expression of some genes and not others in cells' genome. So here we bring in the idea of cell expression. So all diploid cells of an animal and individual organisms share an identical genome, and each contains the entire set of genetic instructions for that organism. But not all genes are expressed or activated in cells. In totipotent embryonic cells, the entire genome is active. So in our next video, we are going to look at how cells are differentiated to suit different functions. For now, we can stop here. Thank you for listening. Please visit my channel, and then you can check for Patrick's live class for more videos that are interactive so that you can learn and be part of the biology life. Thank you for subscribing. Always check on our channel. We are working on every chapter and all work will be available. Thank you for today. Have a nice time.